This video is made possible thanks to InVideo AI. More details coming up soon. Vladimir Putin, the man with the largest nuclear arsenal in the world, loyal defender of the Russian motherland, capable of taming horses, bears, and whatever else he wants. He's an example of a man with hair on his chest, a firm hand, and leadership who now commands the Russian troops advancing in Ukraine. Hey, not so fast, we're getting too excited. Don't we remember this channel's recent videos? The Russian invasion of Ukraine is yesterday's news. These days, everybody is talking about the Ukrainian invasion of Russia. Let's get started. Ukraine, the poorest country in Europe that was supposed to be crushed in a couple of days, has achieved more in 1 week than the Russians did in months of war. Kyiv already controls over 1,000 square kilometers of Russian territory. It's not much, just slightly less than twice the size of a country like Singapore, but it has been quite a coup. Especially when we take into account that the Russian offensive in 2024 has achieved little more than 400 square kilometers. That is, not even half in more than half a year of fierce fighting. This, as you can imagine, has been a major embarrassment for Russia that has been experiencing good news on the Donetsk front. And of course, it also makes us wonder about the current military capability of the Russian bear. Because in a couple of days, if we agree with VisualPolitik subscribers, we would be able to occupy Moscow itself. Don't worry, it's a joke. The question is that, given this situation, the thing we've all been wondering in the VisualPolitik team is, what exactly are the military capabilities that Russia still has at this stage of the war? Is Putin keeping an ace up his sleeve? Or is the war bleeding Russia so dry that they don't even have enough to defend their territory? And if they do have forces left, will they be enough to counter the Ukrainian attack? In this video, we will delve deep into the Russian side and tell you what options Moscow has right now to prevent this war from embarrassing them any further. Let's get on with it. But before, first off, as someone who's been creating YouTube videos for a few years, there's a lot happening behind the scenes to make it all possible. Recently, I came across a tool called InVideo AI. It's the most widely used AI video creator globally, with over 10 million users in more than 150 countries. But it's better if I show you with an example. Just ask InVideo to create a 3-minute video for YouTube. For example, about how Russia battles to avoid running out of planes, a topic we talked about a few days ago. Russia's aviation industry is facing unprecedented challenges since the imposition of Western sanctions in 2020. And if something doesn't quite meet your expectations, you can always make detailed edits as needed. Simply go to the edit command box and type in your request. For example, you can translate to Spanish and add subtitles. It's that simple. Moreover, you can clone your voice and use it to narrate videos in your own voice, in any language. By clicking the link in the description, the pinned comment, or the QR code on the screen, you can create up to 4 videos for free on InVideo. However, they will have a watermark. For just $20 a month, you'll get full access. And if you use our code, VisualPolitik50, you will get twice the number of video generation credits in your first month. It's much more affordable than the cost of all the tools separately. Remember, it also includes a vast library of royalty-free material. Thank you very much to InVideo AI for sponsoring this video, and let's continue with today's content.
And now, what now?
The question everyone is asking, and to which no one has an answer, is why on earth, after 2 weeks of the invasion into Kursk, has Russia still not mobilized a force sufficient to drive the Ukrainians out of their own territory? Well, while there is no quick answer to this, we can take a look at what we do know about where Russia still has its major military assets outside of Ukraine. We are mainly talking about Kaliningrad, Transnistria, and the Arctic front. Putin could try to send troops and material from Kaliningrad, the oblast, sandwiched between Lithuania and Poland. They have nearly 20,000 troops stationed there with T-72 tanks, mobile rocket launchers, Iskander missiles, and dozens of MiG-31 and Sukhoi Su-24 and Su-30 aircraft. What's more, these fighters are equipped with Kinzhal-guided missiles, that is, hypersonic missiles. Undoubtedly, this alone would be a great way for the Russians to put an end to the Kursk situation once and for all. So, why not use it? Well, it's not because they're afraid of leaving Kaliningrad unprotected, although maybe there is some of that too. The problem is that the Russians have not yet invented teleportation. In order to take all this equipment to the war, they would have to mobilize through Belarus, and this has a slight drawback. On the one hand, there is the small problem of the Suwalki corridor, the strip of land belonging to Poland and Lithuania that separates Kaliningrad from Belarus. Obviously, crossing troops over land there is impossible, so at best they could attempt a senseless logistical move by getting them out via sea. The problem it would take much longer. And not only that, the Baltic is clearly already a NATO puddle, particularly after Finland and Sweden joined the alliance. So to do that would be tantamount to giving the Ukrainians many days' notice and full detail of what would be coming their way and when. This would be more typical of a Charlie Chaplin sketch than anything else, but you never know. And to make matters worse, taking troops out of this oblast could end up provoking an uprising in this territory, because its inhabitants are most likely fed up with the war and not being able to move freely in Poland and Lithuania as they did prior to the invasion of Ukraine. So that's why Putin is very unlikely to pull the military assets in Kaliningrad at this point in the war. They are virtually immovable. Well, with this possibility ruled out, we still have two other major Russian military reserves that could be interesting for the future of this war. So what's next? The rebel region of Transnistria in Moldova. From Transnistria, Russia could make inroads into southwestern Ukraine to threaten Odessa and force the Ukrainians to move troops there, thereby weakening their incursion into Russia and their ability to defend the front. The problem is that they have the weapons, but not enough men for this mission. It turns out that Transnistria is home to the Kolbasna arms depot, which is today the largest military arsenal of the entire Cold War. However, at the same time, there are only about 1,600 Russian troops stationed at this location, who are basically there to protect this depot. In other words, launching from here would not be feasible either. On top of that, there is another issue to consider in order to rule out this possibility. The fact that elections in Moldova are only 2 months away. And you're probably thinking, what do I care when the elections are in Moldova? Well, you see, the truth is that this time is a little different. Moscow wants its puppet in the country, Igor Dodon, to win. And of course, an attack on Ukraine launched from the separatist Transnistria region, no matter how small, would only raise alarm bells among the Moldovan electorate. The backlash could be monumental, and Dodon will be completely out of the question. So, neither Kaliningrad nor Transnistria. Where the hell can we get men and weapons, comrade? Well, there is one possibility: the Arctic. Russia has some 13 air bases, 3 large naval bases, and several dozen outposts, radar stations, and air defense centers in the Arctic region. Up there, they accumulate between 30 and 45,000 well-trained soldiers, and a whole catalog of advanced weapons. Take, for example, at least 8 nuclear submarines and between 40 and 50 other military vessels, such as destroyers and frigates. They also have about 100 MiG-31 and Sukhoi Su-33, Su-24, and Su-34 aircraft, not to mention S-400 air defense systems and a lot of electronic warfare equipment. Russia in the Arctic is strong, and that could serve to unburden the front quite considerably. Now, do you know what? There are also problems. For starters, as of today, there is no way for submarines and ships to get from the Arctic to the Black Sea. It's impossible. It would involve crossing NATO-controlled seas, or literally circumnavigating the globe through waters that are also fully or partially controlled by Western allies. As for soldiers and fighters, yes, it would be possible, but leaving the Arctic and Russian dominance over Arctic trade routes unprotected, which are the routes of the future, which would be seen as too risky a move. They simply cannot mobilize many units from there. So that's ruled out. Now, if we discard the 3 major military assets that Russia has left more or less intact, where on earth could Russia get enough forces to reassert itself? Well, to answer that, let's look for a moment at what has been going on recently and how Russia has managed to continue to resist. Could the months be numbered for the Russian bear's military resistance? Well, let's take a look.
Russia, The Walking Dead.
A month and a half ago, the news about the Ukrainian war was very different. It went more or less along these lines.
In Ukraine, the Russian army's gradual seizure of the Donbas accelerates. The Ukrainian army has been forced to retreat in several urban areas. The military deplore the lack of anti-aircraft systems, as well as command errors.
Now, however, there is a Ukrainian invasion underway on Russian soil. Oh, how life can change. But, you know, wars are unpredictable. What Ukraine is doing now with its particular invasion will surely remind you of the rebellion of Yevgeny Prigozhin and the Wagner Group in June 2023. Do you remember? In just a few hours, they managed to advance effortlessly from the Rostov-on-Don area to within just 300 kilometers from Moscow. That is practically half the country from south to north. They eventually came to an agreement. Prigozhin turned around and ended up suffering a trademark accident. Now, do you know what the problem is? Ukraine is not Wagner, and surely no agreement will be enough to stop their particular invasion, or at least not one that doesn't involve Russia exiting the occupied Ukrainian territories, which no one expects to happen in the short term.
Russia appears to have sent several thousand troops from occupied Ukraine to counter Kursk offensive, US officials say.
But then, what on earth is going on with Russia that they are suffering an invasion by the very country they themselves have invaded? Well, everything seems to indicate that Russia has really run dry of conventional forces, and that the powerful rearguard that they claimed they had either does not exist or is not so powerful. It seems that we're practically talking about replacement soldiers and little else. And it's no wonder, the losses so far have been brutal. According to data updated as of 17th of July of this year, Russia has lost more than 3,000 infantry vehicles, 2,000 tanks, and 1,500 armored fighting vehicles. And to top it off, they've lost not only quantity, but also much of their best equipment. What's more, Russia has been conducting a strong offensive against Ukraine since spring. In other words, it has deployed a lot of resources to the front that have resulted in losses and terribly tired soldiers. In fact, to this day, they continue with that offensive and continue to gain territory on the Donetsk front. But then, does this mean that they cannot counter the Ukrainian invasion in any way? Well, let's not go so fast. Moscow continues to hurriedly dust off its weapons stockpiles, many from the Soviet era, such as the T-72, T-62, and even T-55 tanks. They're going with everything they've got. According to General Chris Cavoli, NATO Supreme Allied Commander and head of US European Command, Russia once again has the same number of tanks in operation in Ukraine as it did at the beginning of the war. Of course, the number is not the only important factor, because these days it's hard to find modern tanks on the front lines, as there were in 2022, but the numbers are still there. What's more, as we've already told you in other videos, its arms industry is experiencing a significant increase in production. We're talking about a level of activity that reaches 2 million artillery pieces per year, 100 cruise and ballistic missiles per month, the modernization of 2 160 bombers, the production of 1 million smaller reconnaissance drones per year, and so on and so forth. Okay, these are numbers offered by Russia itself. The reality is probably more modest, but it is undeniable that they have entered a kind of war economy. So whether the real numbers are higher or lower, it's clear that we're talking about significant amounts. But then, why has Russia not been able to repel an invasion on its own territory? For starters, Moscow still has an estimated 3,200 tanks in storage, at least 70% of which have never been moved and are in deplorable condition. Some analysts believe that Russia could start having serious problems maintaining its pace of refurbishing old weaponry as early as next year. Yes, for now they are getting huge numbers of old tanks refitted and traveling to Ukraine to be destroyed there by the HIMARS of the day, but this scenario could be short-lived. In 2023, Russia managed to put about 1,300 old tanks into operation, and this year, a maximum could be reached, but the problem is that there aren't enough of them. Besides, logically, they are not reconditioned all at once, and the Ukrainian front still needs resources too. So it's not so easy to get equipment out of there as it is to assemble a couple of divisions capable of driving out the Ukrainians. So far, the technological inputs have mainly come from China, which is its main supplier. They do so hidden in the form of civilian technology that can be inventively adapted for military use.
US intelligence findings shows China surging equipment sales to Russia to help war effort in Ukraine.
This, which in theory seems like very bad news for Ukraine, could actually be a double-edged sword for the Russians. Yes, for now, thanks to China, they are getting more or less what they need to refurbish their old weaponry. But at the same time, this exposes them to a major vulnerability. If strong Western pressure on Beijing were to succeed in stopping or greatly reducing exports of certain products, Russia would have a huge problem. And take note, some alerts have already been raised for Moscow, for example with news like this.
Russia-China gas pipeline deal stalls over Beijing's price demands. Power of Siberia 2 project would offer lifeline to exporter Gazprom as Moscow's dependence on its neighbor grows.
In fact, it is a clear priority that the Allies need to work on, dissuading the Chinese from continuing to ship certain products to Russia and thinking of some way to compensate them for it. So far, Putin has managed to dodge many of the sanctions, like dodging bullets in the Matrix. But there will come a time when this strategy will backfire, either because of additional costs, lower quality components, or insecure shipments. If the war drags on beyond 2025, it will not be easy for Russia to maintain the current pace of equipment consumption. Given this situation, losing men and war machinery artillery by the bucket load, and with arms reserves falling further and further, it's strange that Ukraine has not attacked earlier to force the situation in Russia. Do Ukrainians have any inside information about the mighty Russian bear? Well, it's not that they are fortune tellers. Although they certainly have access to the best intelligence in the West, they are simply seizing the moment and anticipating what may come their way. And no, on this occasion, we are not referring to showers of fire and missiles against civilian residential buildings. We've been seeing that all through this damn war. Now we turn to what happens out there, on the international chessboard, because that could be the last great trump card for Russia. Following the Kursk surprise invasion, Moscow could be basically depending on what happens, particularly in the United States, next November. VisualPolitik viewers, summer is coming to an end, and it means that the war is gradually entering a much slower pace. This means that Ukrainian troops could stabilize on Russian soil. As of right now, it does not seem far-fetched that they could remain there until 2025. Well, Ukraine's putting its foot down in Kursk might aim to force, as we've already told you, peace talks on fairer terms for Ukraine. And to that end, what happens in the United States in the November elections will be absolutely crucial.
Before I even arrive at the Oval Office, I will have the disastrous war between Russia and Ukraine settled. It will be settled quickly. I will get the problem solved, and I will get it solved in rapid order. And it will take me no longer than one day.
Trump has been clear. He's willing to force Kyiv to negotiate. If he were to take office, we could see a sea change in US foreign policy. Fewer weapons for Ukraine, or perhaps none at all, and much more pressure to finalize a peace agreement. A peace agreement tailored to Putin's needs. Because Ukraine would be desperate to finalize the conflict by ceding territories under the threat that things could get worse if the Americans under the Trump administration cut off the arms supply.
Trump-handed plan to halt US military aid to Kyiv unless it talks peace with Moscow.
And so, intervention in the oblasts bordering Ukraine could be Kyiv's way of trying not only to force fairer negotiations, but also to get some sort of insurance. To have something to put up on the table other than mere Western support. But on the other hand, we can't forget that the Ukrainian soldiers on the active fronts in the Donbass are exhausted, and that the most rested and prepared brigades are precisely those inside Russia. Should the Kursk card fail, and who knows which others may come soon, such as Belarus, the Ukrainians would be sold out under a new Trump administration. And that would force Zelensky to negotiate on terms more favorable to Russia. And I know all this comes down not to Russia's military capabilities, but rather political and diplomatic assets. But pay attention because they could be even more important. Russia could be stronger politically against Ukraine in a few months than it is on the battlefront, just by having a few stars align. It's a possibility that seems remote right now, but watch out, because it is there. Even if Harris is ahead, there's still a long way to go before Americans vote on the 5th of November. And logically, everything is wide open. Many things could happen. To recap, the Ukrainian surprise invasion in Kursk has put Russia at a crossroads, undoubtedly in a much weaker position than it was just a month ago. They don't have the capacity to mobilize much modern military force comparable to the Western weaponry being used by the Ukrainians in Kursk. Their only trump card for recapturing the territory without dismantling the front line is to try to recruit and deploy lots of young people in the area with no military experience and to take a lot of casualties. In short, regardless of what happens in Kursk, Russia's greatest asset to end this war victorious seems to depend, paradoxically, on what happens in the United States in the upcoming elections. It also depends on how long China remains willing to sell civilian technologies that the Russians are using to refurbish tanks. No more, no less. The next few weeks will reveal the outcome of this whole story. But until then, the questions are for you. What do you think Russia might resort to in an attempt to drive the Ukrainians out of their territory once and for all? Would they be willing to leave Kaliningrad, Transnistria, or the Arctic unprotected? Are they as knocked out as they seem? Well, leave us your opinions on all this below in the comments and we'll start a debate. And very important, if you like this video, please like it and subscribe to VisualPolitik so you don't miss any news. As always, thank you for being there. All the best. I'll see you next time.